everybody, Dana here. Welcome. Let's talk about how our metabolism and our mood are affected by this thing called methylation. If you haven't heard about methylation, or even if you have, but it doesn't make a ton of sense to you, I'm hoping that this is going to explain to you what it is and why you should care. So methylation is a process that happens in all of your cells, and it happens in every cell all over your body, and it's going to affect everything, including your DNA expression. So methylation's primary job is to turn genes on and off. It mostly turns them off, but it also can turn some of them on. So even though you have genes, these genes aren't always going to express themselves. Their expression, whether it is on or off, is going to be influenced by many factors, including your diet and lifestyle, and what that does in your cells. And one of the things that these things like diet and lifestyle are influencing is your methylation inside your cells. In fact, methylation is one of two major ways that we are going to affect this genetic expression. Now, the way that we metabolize is also affected by methylation, and metabolism is essentially how we are able to create energy, and it's really about how we digest and absorb nutrients, including our ability to make energy from everything. So methylation also has this other role that is also an important but small role in how we detoxify. And because of that, it can affect, because of all these different things that it does, it can affect the rate at which we age on a biological level. So obviously our age is fixed based on the dates that we are born and such. But the biological age that we're at, including the health of our physiology and how we feel within our body, is going to be in large part affected by things like our methylation. So methylation can be just the right amount, or it can be too fast, or it can be too slow, but even that is a simplification. All you need to know is that the right amount of methylation can definitely make you feel good. And when it's not happening quite right, then you may not feel very well. So this is the mood side of things. If you're not methylating well, you may feel grumpy, you may crave carbs, you may have more tendencies to be addictive in your pursuit of things. And one side that you're not methylating well, for example, might be that you have an active startle reflex. So that can be other things, but that's one of the things that can trigger that kind of jumpiness. So you might know if you know what I'm talking about. Most methyl groups are found in protein, and that's really how it's the beginning of how it's associated with our metabolism. So we need to metabolize proteins to release the methyl groups, and then the methyl groups are in turn going to affect our metabolism. So there's a bidirectional relationship there, and if things start to go downhill, they tend to get worse and worse. And when things tend to get better, they tend to get better and better, because there's this bidirectional relationship between what we're eating and how it impacts our metabolism and how our metabolism impacts our methylation. So what's happening inside of our body is that there's this, pathway of reactions that is going to be the methylation pathway. So when our DNA gets methylated, one thing leads to another, leads to another. Now, for each of these different things to happen and to cue the next thing in the series along the pathway to happen next, we need different kinds of inputs. Some inputs are specific nutrients. B vitamins often are really involved in this process, and that may be why you may have heard that B vitamins are important for metabolism or energy creation or for your nervous system, because if you don't have them, then you might actually stall the process out at some point if you're missing one of the B vitamins along here. And in particular, folate is a really, really important nutrient. We also need B12, we need, B2, we need a B3, niacin. So we need a whole bunch of these in this whole pathway to make sure everything works out properly. And so there are other nutrients as well that can really help us. So some foods that support our methylation, in particular the detoxification aspect of methylation, would include cruciferous vegetables, eggs, Also, certain types of sprouts are really great. So radish sprouts, and in particular broccoli sprouts, are really wonderful. And when we talk about cruciferous vegetables, there are ways that you can optimize those for the compounds that really do the heavy lifting. So for example, if you chop your broccoli and you let it sit for 25 minutes before you eat it, you're going to maximize things like sulforaphane that can really make a difference in this. So sometimes being slow with the way that you prepare your food has benefits. So if you cannot detoxify properly, and the things that are going to be impacted, the things that you won't be detoxifying well, if your methylation isn't working well, are things like your neurotransmitters or your hormones. And so the effect can be quite profound, even though, again, this isn't the heavy lifting or like the biggest role of detoxification in the body. There's many things that get detoxified in the body. It is, a lot of our methylation does take place in the liver. And if we're not methylating well, we can't break down the pathway to break down hormones or to break down neurotransmitters may be affected. And that's why I say methylation does play a minor but a significant role in detoxification. And it can impact things like your levels of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, or your levels of estrogen. And so the thing about that is that poor methylation or the wrong kind of methylation can also be linked to disease states. One of the reasons is if you aren't balanced in your dopamine, you may end up with certain types of issues that are related to dopamine imbalance. Maybe you can think of some of those. Some of the issues that are related to dopamine imbalance include ADHD or Parkinson's. Now, if you can think about some of the imbalances that might be related to estrogen, you may remember that estrogen, when it can't be detoxified, can lead to certain estrogen-dependent cancers. So obviously not a small issue if you're not properly moving these compounds. Now, if you have too little dopamine because you're methylating it out really quickly, then you may actually feel like you need to do certain actions to increase your levels of dopamine. So this is what's typically found in thrill seekers, in people that are addictive and want to get a hit of dopamine in some way. So it can be by fighting with your partner in a relationship or picking the wrong partner. So there's a lot of friction so that you get constant dopamine. Or it can be eating for neurotransmitters. So we may eat carbs, simple carbs, a lot more often than we might otherwise do it if we're quite low in something like serotonin. Or we may eat very highly processed, very hyper palatable foods to get a dopamine hit. So you can see that there's a relationship here between what a lot of people think of as metabolism, like our eating behaviors and how our balance of energy is being maintained, and how we might be impacted by the levels of chemicals in our body, including the way that these methylations are going to affect what type of level of epinephrine and norepinephrine we have left in the body, which is, of course, stress chemicals. So that's also going to be impacting us. And again, there's where it ties into that startle reflex. So under and over methylation certainly tie into mood and metabolism, as you can see, as I'm trying to explain. And a lot of people point out that this is all about the MTHFR gene. Maybe this is a gene that you've heard of. It sounds like a swear word, and it also sounds like methylation to some extent. We can see the MTH in there, like methylation. So we associate this gene with methylating. And so some people think if I don't have the SNP, SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism, or if I don't have the kind of disturbed version of this gene, MTHFR, then I don't have a problem with methylation. Or if my MTHFR is, I have 2 great copies of this gene, then I don't have problems with methylation. The problem with simplifying things like that is that MTHFR isn't the only gene that affects our methylation, and you can have 2 great copies of the gene and still not be methylating well, or you could even be born with 2 not so great copies of the gene. And even though your odds of methylating are significantly worse, of methylating well or worse, you may still methylate well because of the impact of diet and lifestyle on what we're talking about here. So if I already talked to you about the methylation pathway and how each of these different steps may be impacted by different kinds of nutrients. But how you methylate is also going to be impacted by the genes that you have in your body. So I have another diagram here, which is a little bit funny. So you can see there's two sets of grandparents up here, and I only put 2 here and 2 there, although you would have 4 grandparents. So these people ended up having a child, and other people also had a child, and then these 2 had together a set of twins. So even though these twins have the same genetic inheritance, they have the same genes, so they would either have 2 sets of MTHFR SNPs, or they would have 1 MTHFR SNP each. Even if they have the same result, you can see that one of these twins is happy and one of these twins is not happy, even though they have the same genes. Now, that different expression of their genetic inheritance could be because of different lifestyle and foods over here versus different lifestyle and foods over here. They have different personalities, different likes and dislikes, and it gives them different results. And the way that they have that impact on their genetic expression is called epigenetics. So it's how we impact the expression of our genetic potential. And it isn't just the gene called MTHFR that is going to affect our methylation. There's other genes like COMT that also impact how we methylate. And so although there might be some companies that tell you that there's like one super product out there that if you have this gene, you need this product and then you'll get, boom, this result, that isn't really the way that it works in actuality on the ground in the real world, because just like the twins here, you don't just get a certain result based on your genes. You get a certain result based on, yes, nutrients and yes, lifestyle, but you have to have those foundational lifestyle pieces in place before you start messing around with nutrients. And a nutrient might speed up methylation, but speeding up methylation isn't always what we want. Your genes can be acting not so great by becoming overperforming or underperforming. And if you're not sure which one is happening, then more is not always better. In other words, sometimes it's really with methylation, you want to be balanced. So what we're saying is you need to understand your situation at a deeper level to be able to make a good decision. The speed of methylation at the cell level needs to be fast enough, but not too fast and not too slow. If it's too fast, then you actually may end up feeling anxious or wired, or you may be clearing your hormones or your neurotransmitters too quickly. So if you clear your stress hormones too quickly, you may be a little bit too laissez-faire and not have enough anxiety in order to be careful and make smart, careful decisions. But of course, if this is happening too little and you're not clearing out those same neurotransmitters, those stress chemicals, I should say, fast enough, you may feel very, very stressed. If you're not clearing out your dopamine or you're clearing it out too quickly, you can see how that might impact whether you feel depressed or grumpy, whether you feel sluggish, whether you feel motivated. You can see how there's a mood and a connection with the metabolism and methylation in this way. And so the way we behave affects the way our genes express, meaning the genetic expression is affected by the methylation. That's why I called it DNA methylation, because methylation is affecting the way the DNA expresses. So since methylation can affect our DNA, methylation is called an epigenetic lever. So it's a thing that we can exert pressure on to create a different kind of result on how our genes are expressing, on how our DNA is being expressed, which is so exciting. If you think about it, it means that we have this ability, this power in our hands to affect our methylation with things like the food that we eat, which is, of course, one of my great passions. If you didn't know that about me, I am a nutrigenomic focused nutritionist. So I really like to focus on how food can impact our genome. And that's what nutrigenomics is, how nutrients impact genetic expression. And since methylation affects our DNA, it's one of my favorite epigenetic levers on which to pull or exert an influence in order to impact long-term health. And so we know that if you focus on a high methylating food, a food methylation source diet, that these are types of epi-nutrients that will affect the epigenetic result, and you can change your destiny to some extent this way. And I don't think it's overstating it, because there's so much good science that really backs this up. They put people on a diet for 8 weeks of foods that were high in methylating. They contributed methylation donors, is what we call it. And so these methyl donors, which are these nutrients that impact along this pathway, all the different methyl donors might be folate in one area, or B12 in another area, or another B vitamin at a different point. So these methyl donors impact the way that this whole pathway operates, and so they can change or balance our methylation so that it works better. And then there's also some nutrients in some foods that we might even call methylation adaptogens, and they help to just balance the whole flow of this pathway, so it's neither moving, no gears are moving too quickly and no gears are moving too slowly. So it's not too much or too little, which is really quite amazing if you think about it. So this adaptive ability is what gives them the name methylation adaptogens. And so one that you might know is this really well-known spice, turmeric, and how it gives us curcumin, which is a certain type of polyphenol, and this is considered a methylation adaptogen. So this nutrient is something that can actually help us to have better DNA expression, to ensure that we have better, healthier reproduction. But what they were testing in one study is if you get enough of these types of nutrients, what will happen and they did it for 8 weeks, and they reduced people's biological age by, I believe, more than 3 years in only 8 weeks. So you can imagine this is going to set you up to have more health and vitality, less risk of disease or illness, and hopefully better progression of your abilities as you age, less regression of your things like the amount of muscle that you have on your body. So you're maintaining things in a better state than you would physically if you weren't eating as many methylation foods. So there's a lot of talk of blue zones, people all over the world that live 100 years and longer, and they're saying, well, what do they all have in common? They have many things in common and many things that diverge. But it doesn't really matter if you're eating olive oil as your methylation adaptogen, or if you're eating soy products as your methylation adaptogen, as they do in Sardinia and Greece, or as they do in parts of Asia, like in Okinawa. These are very different ways that they impact their methylation, but they're both consuming lots of methylation nutrients. And so that may be a common thread between them, because this is what's involved in all of these processes. So I hope that really helped to explain to you what methylation is. Again, it happens in every single one of your cells. It's in particular a really important aspect of what our liver does. So a lot of methylation takes place in the liver. There is a connection because of this methylation mostly happening in our liver. There is a connection to our digestion and metabolism, and also to the production, because our liver produces so many of our hormones. It's also connected to our mood and to the way that we feel, our emotions, our feelings. And so it's also connected to our gut. Our gut is going to impact how well we methylate, and our methylation is going to impact our gut too. So one thing is, if you have genes like COMT that are operating too fast, you're going to end up with one result. Or if you end up with one of these genes like COMT or MTHFR that's underfunctioning, you're going to end up with a different result. So people with a very fast COMT may be inattentive, they may fidget, they may move a lot to stimulate their brains and make dopamine, you might guess. This is me. And if you have a faster you are more likely to need to eat more protein and need to supplement with tyrosine. So this is something that I tend to do. This is one reason why, as a nutritionist, I never jumped on the veganism bandwagon. I did used to be a vegetarian for several years before I was a nutritionist, and that wasn't a great time for me. And now I understand one of the reasons why protein is so important to me as someone with ADHD. I need the source of that amino acid tyrosine in particular to be able to balance out my DNA methylation pathway so that I get the kind of results that I want. Now, if you have a really fast COMT, I'm calling it COMT, then you're going to clear everything, not just your neurotransmitters quickly, but also your hormones. So you may also know about me that I am someone that went into menopause very, very young. And so my levels of estrogen were extremely low and still are even all this time later. And I do balance out my COMT so that I can have a more normal amount of neurotransmitters and hormones now. And that's part of my secret. And one of the reasons why I don't have to eat consistently super high protein levels in order to focus my mind, because the way that my COMT gene is operating is more balanced. So you can see how you can apply these things in the real world to get a really meaningful result. And if you have the opposite issue, if your COMT is really slow, then you may be someone that doesn't clear out hormones very well at all. So you may have pretty high levels of estrogen, and that can actually impact things like your predisposition to cancer, but also more common issues like PMS, insomnia, and maybe even high blood pressure. So you can see how these things impact us in many different ways. It'll impact the way that you age, your metabolism, your energy, how you handle toxins, your overall health and vitality, your health at the biological level. And so if you want to be someone who's healthy, resilient, youthful, you want to balance your methylation, and it will help you to have a more balanced mood. This is all based on really good quality clinical research. It's all been done in humans. And so I do recommend, if you struggle with any mood issues, if you struggle with any metabolism issues, then do what you can to learn about methylation foods and methylation adaptogen foods, how you can get methyl donors from your foods. I have a whole handout. I have a whole list of these foods that you can get from me. Please just leave me a comment below if that's something that you'd like to receive. I can email it to you, no problem at all. So I'd love to offer that to you, and anything else that I can do. This is one of the ways that I try to stay young through really natural means. One of the reasons why I haven't jumped on a Botox or fillers or those kinds of things, even though I've been in menopause for 10 years. I do think that it is something accessible to most people, because even if you don't like some of the methyl donor foods, probably gonna like other methyl donor foods, and that means it's flexible and it can really be something that you can use regardless of what kind of eating style you follow. Even if you're on keto, you can eat leafy greens. In fact, you should eat leafy greens if you're on keto, so that you can really balance out the function of everything in your body. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you understand a little bit more about why methylation matters, how it interacts with our mood and metabolism. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Dana Green-Remedios, a triple board certified registered holistic nutritionist with an interest in healthy aging, staying youthful, and being happy, healthy, and wealthy, and how that helps us to really live our best lives. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye for now.